Okay, so YouTube is a visual medium and all that jazz, so I don't need to tell you what this game's art style is. You can tell just by looking at it. As for the game itself, before we dive any deeper, if you like what you see and want to help me out, please consider thinking this video is the best by giving it a like, tell me what your thoughts are on Kirby's Dream Land 3 in the comments, and ring the notification bell after subscribing to really help me out. You can find me on Twitch, join my Discord server, or follow my Twitter if you like me that much, but regardless, I appreciate it. And if you like this video, I made it for Kirby month number 4, and as is, I have 5 videos in this series currently. Feel free to check out the playlist for more. Moving on. Remember Dark Matter from Kirby's Dream Land 2? They're back! Kirby and friends, more friends in fact, go on another adventure throughout Dreamland to save the day from this invasive species. Returning friends like Rick, Kine, and Koo join new buddies, Pitch, Choo Choo, and Nago, in a gorgeous adventure to save the day. Combine returning abilities as well as the brand new cleaning with your friends for all kinds of fun. In the Dreamland 2 video, I went into detail about how it felt like the first direct sequel. I'm writing these scripts pretty far in advance, so I'm not sure if people agree or disagree with that point, but if we can't agree on that, we can certainly agree that Dreamland 3 is a direct sequel to Dreamland 2. The game has a slower pace, there's a focus on exploration over action, and as mentioned, the animal friends return with the same ability mixing gameplay from KDL 2. Dreamland 3 is Dreamland 2, but fully realized. Dreamland 3 may not be as action-packed as Superstar, but being a simpler game comes with its perks. Namely, it's much harder to blaze through enemies with very little thought. You can actually dash in this game with every character, in almost every circumstance, so it's not like the pacing of the game is worse than Superstar, but enemy placement feels much more planned out. On top of that, when you get hit in Dreamland 3, you don't have much time before you can take damage again. I don't want to give the illusion that this is a super hard game or anything, but it's definitely not as easy as you might think. Of course, this doesn't apply to the entire game. The early game is easier than the mid, and the game reaches its peak in terms of difficulty towards the end. It's a very natural difficulty progression, easily one of, if not the, best in the series in that regard. And don't get me wrong, Dreamland 3 has its fair share of cryptic puzzles, but a lot of the issues present in Dreamland 2 were fixed. You're actually given proper hints to the less obvious puzzles, there's a lot more variety, and because the camera is properly zoomed out, you don't have to worry about screen crunch ever. The levels still focus on exploring, but it certainly feels much better when you can fully see where you're going. It's also much better to explore with the animal buddies this time. As mentioned, moving with them feels a lot better because they can all dash. Kine in particular really benefits from this because, for some reason, his dash and his jump are completely insane. I'm not complaining, of course, but even Rick got off pretty well too. He still can't float, but he's got a good dash, he can jump on top of enemies to clear areas of the game faster, and he doesn't slip on ice. The new animal friends have their own ups and downs too. Pitch, for example, may not have the aerial prowess of Koo, but he can actually move on the ground, making him feel much more natural. Choo Choo and Nago have multiple mid-air jumps, but only Nago can jump on enemies like Rick can. In exchange, Choo Choo can climb on ceilings, which looks pretty fun, honestly. Basically, which animal friend you choose comes down entirely to personal preference. That's not quite the case for the speedrun, but we're talking about these games in a much broader sense, so it's fine. To back that up, there's a much better balance of land, air, and water compared to Dreamland 2. Water is still the rarest of the 3, but because he's much better on land now, this doesn't affect Kine nearly as much. Also, while most of the animal buddies that aren't Kine still do struggle underwater, most of them aren't that bad. Controlling them is still fun, and that's what counts. I don't have any real way to segue into talking about the presentation, but this is the most obvious argument for Dreamland 3 being the best in the series, so it's okay. Just look at this game. The crayon coloring book aesthetic fits Kirby like a charm, the bright and cheery colors doing a wonderful job of inviting you to explore Dreamland at your own pace. In a strange way, it even helps the creepier aspects of the game stand out even more. Without getting too deep into spoilers for those who may want to try the game, the final boss fight has stuck out to so many players for so many years for a reason. Kirby 64 may have been the one that got the T rating, but it was not the first Kirby game to have blood in it. Let's just leave it at that. I should also mention that the music for this game is stellar as well. Super Nintendo music is always great, but Dreamland 3 has so many good tracks, it's hard to keep count. The Sand Canyon music came from this game, so it has to have a stellar soundtrack. There's so many wonderful things about Dreamland 3 that make it such a wonderful time. I think the number one reason why it stands out so much is that it's one of the very few games that actually has a good balance of how it makes you feel while still being a really good game. Most games that are feel-good experiences focus so much on presentation that you're left with a very bare-bones game, and a lot of fantastic games can feel very dry in terms of things like inspiration, emotion, general presentation, originality, that stuff. Dreamland 3 is a masterfully built game with some of the best graphics of all time, and I think that's plenty of reasons to consider Dreamland 3 the best game in the series. Alright, so Dreamland 2 may not have had a dash, but Kirby and friends at least had a solid walk speed. Dreamland 3 is so obsessed with being lax and artsy that they made Kirby's walk speed the demonic plague I wouldn't set upon anybody. I get it, walk speed shouldn't be fast, but this? Oh, but you claim Kirby has a dash. And that's true, he does have one, and it's one of the weirdest dashes in the series. He speeds up way too fast for the camera keeps up, and he speeds up way too much in comparing to his walk. Doing things like jumping and turning around just feel off in comparison to his run speed. And when you factor in the animal buddies like Kyan, similar to what I mentioned before, things get even worse. The pacing is the shot of the heart for Dreamland 3, and is the main thing that makes this the worst in the series. Things like the cryptic heart stars and constantly getting hit definitely make it a worse experience by comparison, but this is one of the simplest arguments I've had to make thus far. Say what you will about Kirby Superstar, but it had fantastic game flow. You were never in the same place for a very long time, things were never confusing due to the simplistic nature of the controls, and there is always something to do. Enemies to fight, gaps to flow over, maybe even collectibles to get. It's fun. Dreamland 3 is so slow that the experience that you're going to get is falling asleep. It also direly lacks in innovation. Dreamland 2 is to Dreamland 3 as Adventure is to Superstar, and while Adventure and Superstar are radically different because of how differently they're designed, Dreamland 2 and 3 are practically carbon copies of each other, and let me tell ya, calling this game Kirby's Dreamland 2 version 2 or KDL 2.2, whatever, is really not that far off. The Animal Buddy idea is ripped straight from Dreamland 2, the style of collectible is straightly ripped from Dreamland 2, the way copy abilities work is completely unchanged from Dreamland 2, even the structure of the boss fights, Dreamland 2. This may be the least inventive Kirby game of them all, masked behind its art style. And sure, even when playing a really mean devil's advocate, I'm not going to belly the graphics, but games are far more than just looking pretty. But wait! There's one concept they borrowed from Superstar to make a game like this stand out. Co-op! Player 2 can control Gooey. And look, I love Gooey dearly, and there's no reason that you shouldn't love Gooey dearly, but the co-op in this game has to be the worst. Gooey can't really do anything. He can eat enemies and copy their ability like Kirby, but only one player could have a good time with their Animal Buddy. If another player tries, the first player gets kicked off. So what's the point of playing as Gooey if only one player gets to have a good time? Dreamland 2 isn't perfect, but it took the first game, physics, controls, and all, and expanded it to such a degree on the same hardware that you really can't help but be impressed. The hardware is certainly better for Dreamland 3, but the software is worse. I know it came after Superstar, and I could easily critique it for going back to a slower-paced formula, but the formula is not the problem. Dreamland 2, Crystal Shards, and even Amazing Mirror and Squeak Squad are not what I'd call action-heavy games, but they range from really fine to really good. Dreamland 3 takes it too far in one direction, and unless you have bad insomnia and direly need sleep, or else you'll die or something, Dreamland 3 is the worst game in the series. You know what time it is, everybody. Time to find out what my Discord thinks of Kirby's Dream Land 3. And you thought I had nothing to say for Kirby Superstar? There is nothing here for Dreamland 3. Nobody dissed the art style, but at the same time, cute and charming was kind of the best thing people had to say about it. Not that it was bad or anything, but also not that it's particularly great either. I don't quite want to call Dreamland 3 divisive, but you'll see a lot of opinions on both sides. Some people really like the game, some people really don't. That's all well and good, but even though it's not my favorite, I find myself getting particularly sad when I hear negative takes on Dreamland 3. Even writing and reading this script is honestly really bumming me out. I guess you could call it my comfort game in that sense. The visuals, the sound, just the overall feel of the game makes me really happy. They went all out in that regard, and it shows. Of course, it's one of my favorites because I find the game so much fun to play. Even though Koo is still the clear-cut best animal friend, I find the other animal friends far more fun to play, making this a much easier game for me to get into casually. Going for 100% can be frustrating, as some of the heart stars are really cryptic, but enough of them are good to where it's a minor complaint, at least for me. It's slow-paced if you want to take it slow, but fast-paced if you run through the levels instead. Regardless of what kind of mood I'm in, I enjoy myself whenever I replay the game, and I think that's enough. It's certainly not for everybody, but at least for me, Kirby's Dream Land 3 is one of the best.